KTP, the place to be, for we are creative people. And some place to be, talking with the Honorable Dr. Leonard Jeffries. And it's a pleasure to have you on the line today. We have been discussing a topic of what's going on. And in order to find out what's going on, we got to talk to the key people who really know what's going on. And we've been discussing the topic of the UNIA, the WADU and the PADU and the African Union, and we've covered quite a bit of territory. However, at this point, we need the doctor. We need the doctor to come into the house. So, Dr. J, can you briefly, I mean, the world knows who you are, and we understand that that there's a lot of people who know, but there's a few people who don't know. So briefly, can you just introduce yourself before we get into this conversation?
Well, certainly. I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of the program, so we can get into at least begin the dialogue to discuss some of these serious issues. And I've been fortunate to be part of this dialogue in reference to African peoples in a real way for the last 50, 60, 65 years. That's very presumptuous. I'm 75 years old. I had my birthday in January with the great ambassador Dudley Thompson.
Congratulations.
We're born on the same day. He was born, he was 95, I was 75, January the 19th.
Wow.
But what I'm trying to say is I've been a long-distance runner in this whole quest to restore Africans to their dignity. And for me, I guess it began when I was 10, 12 years old, preteen, and has continued. And so I've been able to see the sweep of history and been involved in it in very deep ways, along with a whole host of others. So there is what I call a rise of African peoples, and we're referring to it as the African Renaissance movement, the rebirth, the resurrection of African peoples. And so I've been able to see, feel, smell, taste it ever since I was a youngster, and so I've been able to appreciate it. I was born in North New Jersey. My parents, mother from Virginia, father from Georgia. Mother became a serious Garveyite, Booker T. Washingtonite, W.E.B. Du Boisite, as she came up from Virginia and then moved into North New Jersey. So I was brought up, my brother and I, we were brought up with an appreciation of Booker T. Put your buckets down where you are, Booker T. Washington. W.E.B., develop your mind. And Marcus Garvey, you are a global African family. So that as a youngster, that was what kept us together in terms of our consciousness and our formation. And so I've just continued that. I graduated from high school in Newark, New Jersey. I graduated from grammar school in Newark, and I was the president of grammar school, one of the leaders and president of my homeroom in the high school. And then when I went on to college, Lafayette College in Eastern Pennsylvania, that same leadership training took place. I was the president of one of the fraternities. There were only 4 or 5 black youngsters there, and I became the president of the Jewish fraternity. So, that leadership development process, along with the opening of my mind and the development of my consciousness, continued. And then, 1959, when I graduated, after I did a study for 2 years of the urban crisis in America, and traveled across the country, analyzing what was going on. Then, in 1959, I won a scholarship to go overseas to study in Switzerland. Beat out the competition. All of these white boys that was putting in their resumes, the black youngsters' resume rose to the top. So I went to Europe to study in Switzerland, international affairs in French.
All right.
Did that, one of the first Americans in years to pass the exams. But it was in 1959-60 in Europe that I met Africa. And it was a kind of a shock to me, a culture shock, because whenever I met these Africans, young fellows, studying there, and I ran up to them because Switzerland was very European, very white, so I was looking for some African brotherhood, and I met the brothers, and they said, I said, who are you? Where are you from? And they said, je suis français. and in French, that means I'm French.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm looking at this dude, and he's from Guinea or Senegal.
Look just like you.
Or the Congo, look like me.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he's French. And so after a while, in frustration, I started to give up on dark black folk like myself, looking for some brotherhood. My brother biologically is light, so I said, well, maybe I can find some brotherhood in these light-skinned dudes. Hey, brother, who are you? Where are you from? Je suis français. And the same thing, and these brothers were from Martinique, Guadeloupe, Guyana, and South America, the French colony, or the elite of Haiti. So here in Europe, I'm meeting Africans that are not being formed to have an African consciousness, but are being formed to identify with the European.
Wow.
And this is 5960. And so it was at that moment of my life that I went through a heavy change, transformation, and rebirth in terms of African consciousness. I knew there had to be some Africans fighting for African consciousness, so somehow how I learned it, I don't know, but I said I better go to Paris because there's more strategic Africans here. So I catch the night train from Lausanne and Geneva, Switzerland. I get to Paris in the morning. I go to the left bank where the student quarters are, the university, and I met up with Présence Africaine. That's the brothers and the brother Alioune Diop and his wife, Madame Diop, that set up a bookstore, library, and that was where pan-africanism was being discussed. That's where revolution against colonialism was being discussed. That's where liberation movement, and that's where I met Cheikh Anta Diop in 1960 in Présence Africaine. Alioune Diop was like his big brother. In fact, he dedicated his great work, I'm looking at it now, Civilization or Barbarism.
All right.
He dedicated that to Alioune Diop. And so it was there that I met Africans who were really trying to be Africans and really trying to develop their mind and really trying to develop values and principles that they could apply to the African world, really trying to find a unity of Africa. The first book by Cheikh Anta Diop that I bought at Présence Africaine was called Les Fondements économiques et politiques de l'État fédéral africain. It was later, 14 years later, translated by Mercer Cook and others into Black Africa. And it lays out why we need a unified African continent, and we need to know where the resources of Africa are and use them for Africa. So I met this brother, Cheikh Anta Diop, and my life has not been the same.
All right.
In 1960. And he was truly a scientist, a scholar, a linguist, political, well, he wanted to set up political parties, progressive, socialist, Marxist, Leninist parties. I mean, that was his philosophy. He was a philosopher. And so it's hooking up with this type of explosion of African greatness that has allowed me to get caught up in that whirlwind that Marcus Garvey was talking about, and I haven't been the same since.
All right.
And so we're still moving in that Pan-African vein, that vein of struggle, and now to go on the world stage and see Africans trying to unify their world is an extraordinary thing. Some people are worried, well, there's too much confusion, there's conflict, there's leadership that ain't correct. All of that's insignificant. The fact that Africans are moving to take the 55 states and find a unifying formula, the fact that Africans at this juncture will say we can't go nowhere without the African diaspora. That means Africans out of Africa, in Europe, in North America, in Central America, in South America, in the islands of the Caribbean, in India, in the Oceania, in the Pacific Islands. So there is a movement of extraordinary historical proportions that's now taking place. So our little inability to do this and inability to get this done and inability to find linkages is insignificant. Insignificant. Ain't the main ball game. That's ping pong in the basement. We are on the world stage, in the World Series, and we got to drop this little mentality that has us involved in personal this and personal that, organizational this, organizational that, and not see the rise of the African and the linkage. I mean, so that's my role now, is just to let you all know that having come from a household of black folk up from Georgia and Virginia, and now, and moving on the world stage as I have since the 1960s, living in Africa for those in the 60s, most of that time I was in Africa, in Guinea, in Senegal, in Ghana, meeting with the leaders, Sekou Touré and Nkrumah and Modibo Keita of Mali, going to the Congo in 1964, 63, 64, in the chaos of the Congo, in the aftermath of the death of Lumumba, and then the emergence of this crook, Mobutu, that the Western world put in place to destroy any possibility of the Congo being organized to serve its own people. But a lot of that is now being pushed aside, and we're looking for unity. But of course, everybody's looking for the African continent except African peoples now.
Wow.
A few of us are looking for the African continent, but we're looking more toward how did it happen that our young men, somebody got our mind, we done lost our mind.
Yes, absolutely.
How did it happen that our young men, who are the core of our leadership that has to be developed for the future, have decided to show the world their behind and not their mind?
Yes, yes.
Somebody has programmed us for devastation. Africans are winners. We're born to win, but we're programmed to lose. And that's a formula all around the world that we got to change. We're born to win. We are the foundation of the human family. The genius of the human family is in us. It's passed down through our gene pool into other so-called races. But how come we can't tap into that genius and let it work for us? Somebody has programmed us for self-destruction, and we've got to get into a reprogramming process. Change, transformation, rebirth. All life is change, transformation, and rebirth. Every cell of your body is going through change, transformation, regeneration, rebirth. Every system of your body, every social system, every ecological system, every cosmic system is going through change, transformation, rebirth. And once we get control of that, then we can change and transform into a great African as opposed to a young man who wants to go and show the world his behind and ain't even seriously developed his mind.
Right, absolutely. Well, talking about the sagging, it appears to me as if that's like a flag flying at half-staff, and that lets you know that something seriously has gone wrong. When you see a flag flying half-staff, something has died, somebody has died, something has happened that has caused people to stop and take a look. And that's where we are with that. But moving right along, we have gained quite a bit of knowledge and information from Baba Watusi on the African Union and where we stand coming up to the now. And you are the current president of the World African Diaspora Union. And can you give us an update as to what occurred in Africa a couple of weeks ago?
Well, yes, this past month has been one of the most historic periods of the history of African peoples. And it's the culmination of a process that began in earnest 50 or more years ago when Africans came together in Addis Ababa in 1963 and formed the OAU, the Organization of African Unity. And so with the emergence of the new independent nations and then the continuous liberation struggles, this increase in African independent nations or semi-independent nations was a process that needed to be organized globally, continentally, and so that did take place. So from 1963, the increase of African independent nations joined this formula located at Addis Ababa, the Organization of African Unity. But it became clear that the Europeans had no intention of really letting these nations be free and really develop. And so that struggle with the European world has continued to go on. But as Africans began to try to make these mini-states work, they realized that some of them were not viable. They were colonial entities that became states, but they didn't have the viability to sustain a nation. So the Africans began to realize that you had to have regional bodies in order to make the nation state work for African peoples. And as a youngster, I went to Columbia University. After I graduated Lafayette College and came back from Europe, I did my master's essay in the African Studies program at Columbia on the Senegal 4-year development plan, and the continuation of the title was the regional integration of West Africa. When the AU was born in Addis Ababa in May, I had just completed my master's thesis on that you have to have a plan in order to develop, and you have to have a regional connection in order for that planning of the nation to make some sense. So it's amazing to me that as a young man in his 20s, I was thinking about all of these things. Now, over the next 50 years, to see them blossom and to actually take form, it is an enlightenment for me, the likes of which I could not have imagined, but it is happening. Fast forward to the 90s, it became clear that you needed to have a greater formula, so they moved away from the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, into the African Union. So in 2002 and 2003, the Organization of African Unity that was formed in Addis Ababa in 1963 began to talk about perfecting the union and not only developing it in terms of the African nations, but expanding it to the diaspora. So the AU was born out of the OAU. And that African Union in 2002 and 3 said we've got to link up with our diaspora. And so now you have a process of nation building and regional development and continental development that links us in a global development. And so that's what the overall view of the African Union is all about. And it is divided, the Union on the continent is divided into 5 regions: the North Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, West Africa, and South Africa. But what they also needed was to link up Africans out of Africa into a region, so the concept of the 6th was born. And so we are working on how can we make this formula work, unifying the African world in its various components. That's a work in progress. Nobody has all the answers. Nobody has all the wisdom. Nobody has all the understanding. It's going to be a collective process of the African family moving forward and moving up and finding its way in the world. And so that's what this whole business with the African community is now. You have on the scene WADU, the World African Diaspora Union, because we realize we have our various pan-African formulas. Some of the older ones go back into the consciousness of Marcus Garvey that was brought here to link up with Booker T. Washington, and eventually became part of this whole pan-African formula. So you have the UNIA, African Community Leagues process, and then you have the process of the modern Pan-African formulation that became the Pan-African movement in 1945, in which great African leaders met from America, from the West Indies, from South America, from the African continent, and they began to put the formula of African liberation, African self-development, and African struggle together. So now we're seeing the birth and the manifestations of these seeds that were planted now actually bearing fruit. And this past month, when I was in South Africa, as smart as I am and as wise as I have been in the 100+ trips I've made and living around the world, my mind was blown because I didn't know there was a World African Parliament in place, already established, with an institutional structure and hundreds if not thousands of people involved. And what they were doing in this meeting a few weeks ago was to involve in an organic way, in a tight way, the African diaspora. So the elected officials of the African diaspora, the parliamentarians of the African diaspora, have been woven in a continental parliament that the Africans already have in place that is functional.
All right.
And so that's why I'm saying this about our petty little problems, and our ego satisfaction that we're looking for, but there's a movement, and we can provide an impetus for the movement to be even stronger, because the New World African doesn't come empty-handed, doesn't come empty-headed. He comes with a mind that has been expanded. Having been in the Western world, he comes with a growing consciousness, this hunger to link up to the African continent. And that was the consciousness of the 1800 Africans like Henry Highland Garnett and these others. And then from the Caribbean, you get the H. Sylvester Williams, who talks about unity in the first Pan-African Congress. Then W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, all of that is now being institutionalized, and it's absolutely necessary, because there are global African families around other peoples that are mobilizing. The Chinese are organizing and mobilizing in the greatest force that has been created by the human family in the shortest period of time. Within 30 years, the Chinese Revolution of the 50s and 60s has now become a global family with the power of the Chinese.
Wow.
The Indians have produced the same process. The Arabs have produced the same process in the same period of time, the last 50 years. The Europeans are no longer at each other's throat, the communists on one side and the capitalists on the other. They found a unity formula, and all of them have been unified, and they know that the great prize is Africa. And the one unification that they have globally is that we're going to super exploit Africa by any means necessary. And the only way that it can be blocked and stopped is if the African family organizes itself and say that we're going to block this exploitation by any means necessary. And we're going to unify Africans everywhere to make sure that Mother Africa and Father Africa serves African peoples globally, and is not super exploited to serve the Chinese, super exploited to serve the Indians, super exploited to serve the Arabs, super exploited to serve white folks, communists, and capitalists.
Wow. Now we see an escalation of going into Africa, claiming that one of the leaders who is actually a good guy, they turn him into a bad guy using the American press, and they say that this particular leader is killing his people. They
demonize him.
Yes,
and use that as a justification.
Absolutely. Now,
and your audience should know that nobody understands that better than I.
Yes.
Nobody was more demonized and victimized than I was 20 years ago.
Wow.
And they used that same tactic because we were involved in what we call the curriculum of inclusion process.
Mm-hmm.
We were trying to take this enormous history of African peoples and put it in the curriculum of the United States, and if possible, the curriculum of the world. And they came with a plan. We're going to derail this, and we're going to use the demonization of Dr. Jeffries as the technique to do it. And so they came at me with the worst attack in the history of the world on a professor.
Wow.
There have been other attacks throughout history, but at no point were those attacks formulated around high technology.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came at me. If you go on the Internet, there will be 1 million items on Dr. Leonard Jeffries, and 99% of them negative. I'm the worst person in the world, a vicious demon, worse than Hitler. But fortunately, I learned long ago that you don't let your enemy define you. You don't even let stupid friends of yours define you. You define yourself for yourself.
Absolutely.
So I know who I am.
Yes.
I know what I want to be. I know where I'm going. So I stood up against the greatest onslaught ever waged against a single individual, and I'm still standing.
I understand that you won.
Not only did I win it, but I've won it not for me. I won it for all of us who have to take this truth and hold it up to the world and say that African peoples are not enslaved folks. African peoples are not anybody's property. African people are not inferior. The knowledge that we have is clear. African peoples are the foundation of the human family. There's only one human race, and that human race is African. Everybody else is a manifestation, a mutation off of the African gene pool. That's the science and history that white folk have developed over the last 50 years, and all of it affirms the African origin of civilization, the African evolution of society, and the African cradle of civilization. That's the victory. We've won that intellectual warfare. It wasn't just a question of putting a few dots and spots in the white curriculum. We now have the knowledge of the bodies of information about the world that we are the world. We don't have to sing it with Michael Jackson. It is the reality that the Creator has provided for humankind. We are the world. There's no Eskimo race. There's no Haitian Jamaican race. There's no English race. There's no Russian race, Chinese race. There's the human race, and it is African. And when we look at that enormous history and find that we began the human race not 6,000 years ago. We began it, if anything, 6 million years ago.
Wow.
Cheikh Diop, in this book I'm looking at now, Civilisation ou Barbarie, this is the French edition, he takes the first 100 pages and summarizes scientific development to establish, without a doubt, the African origin of humankind. So our myths and our legends about a Garden of Eden and all of that are trying to explain the mysteries of life, but that's not science and history.
No.
That's philosophy and theology, and if you want, ideology and mythology to explain mysteries. But the real explanation that modern science has laid out has establishes Africans emerging from the human creation process millions of years ago. Ain't no Europeans, ain't no Chinese, ain't no Indians from India, ain't no Eskimos. There's just Africans. And as humankind evolves with the latest genome project, the DNA studies over the last 20 or 30 years, they have established clearly that there's an evolution of modern humanity over the last 200,000 years, and that development doesn't take place in Europe or in China or in Asia. And if it does, it's with African peoples. But there is an emergence, change, transformation, rebirth of ancient humanity millions of years ago. It has now developed into modern humanity, Homo sapiens sapien, large brain humanity, and that drama takes place all over Africa. And then Africans began to walk out of Africa and people the world. And then they find the blessed ecologies, the river valleys, a blessed ecology where you have your economics, politics, and cultural dynamics, where you can grow your crops and you can have large populations that can develop specializations, and you can have your crafts and whatnot developed. And then you can develop a political structure to control this and a spiritual structure to see it as linked up to the cosmos. And so what has happened with the emergence of modern humanity, the blessed ecology of the river valleys, the Nile River Valley, the Niger River Valley in Africa, and in Western Asia, the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, and in India, the Indus Valley and the Ganges Valley, and in China, the Yellow River Valley and the Yangtze River Valley, and in the lakes and rivers of Central and South America, all around this sun belt of the world, people found cradles of civilization, and Africans were in the forefront these last 10,000 years of moving modern humanity into its present stage of development. So when we look at the sweep of history, we've got to change all of this mess. We have his story and not the story of the history of the human family.
Not our story.
His story is a story of rich white men with property and power that has distorted the truth. And that's why they came at me. But I stood with the truth. Come on, no, I'm dealing with it. It ain't a personal thing. You can wipe me out. But the message is still there. The scientific historical message cannot be changed. It can be perverted. It can be disguised. It can be hidden. But we're now exposing it. And so that's our strength. That's the victory. And so that's where we're going. And that's where we got to get our people to move away from worrying about their behind, to move away from worrying about their hair, to move away from worrying about bleaching their skin, to move away from worrying about sex at the low level of animal, and move into a divine sexual relationship of producing God over and over and over again with the birth out of the sacred womb of the African woman. We got to move at another high level in order to deal with the emergence of the Chinese, the emergence of the Indians, the emergence of the Arabs, the emergence of the Europeans, and all of them wanting to take Africa for super exploitation.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I tell you, this is our day, and all indications point to the fact that we are rising and we are moving forward. We'd like to ask you at this time, Dr. J, you mentioned discovering the World African Parliament. What else did you discover, or what else did you find that might need to be passed on to the rest
of the family? This last 10 years, from 2002 and 2003, when they began to put the African Union in place, they began to say, how can we organize our world? How can we maximize our greatness and raise it up high? So in 2004, we met in Senegal. They called it a meeting of the African intellectuals, scholars, and leaders. And we met talking about how can we create a pan-African dynamic to link African peoples up. And so they wanted the pan-African scholars, the revolutionary scholars. They didn't want the Skip Gates of the world. They didn't want the Cornel Wests of the world. They didn't want the Michael Eric Dysons of the world. They wanted the people who had an African consciousness. And so we met the Dr. Wade Nobles, the Dr. Tony Martin, the sisters, including my wife, Dr. Rosin Jeffries, the leaders of our organization at the time, ASCAC, the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization, Sister Nzinga, Dr. Ruth Love, Dr. Marimba Ani, and those types, our sister, Dr. Sheila Walker, along with myself and Professor Small and a whole host of others from all around the African world. We met to meet with our leaders to map out how we can produce a plan for the rise of African peoples. And so there were other meetings in 2005, 2006, and 2007. I attended some of those meetings. And at the same time, they developed a image of what we were about. And that image became this African Renaissance Monument, which was conceived in 2002, 2003. The cornerstone was laid in 2003 and 2004 by Mbeki, the president of South Africa, and the monument is in Senegal. The president of Nigeria was there, the president of South Africa was there, the president of Senegal, and other presidents, and they laid the cornerstone for a monument. Over the last 7 years, they built this monument, and it is the most important image for black people in the world. It is the rise of the African family. It is 74 feet high. It's taller than the Statue of Liberty. It's taller than Jesus the Redeemer overlooking Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It is the rise of the black man, this powerful black man. And holding in his right hand, he's holding onto his rock, his wife, his woman, his partner for life. And he's holding up into his left hand his child. And that child is not playing with the daddy. That child is pointing to the future.
Absolutely.
This is one of the greatest images that I've ever seen, and we're living it now. It was inaugurated 2003. It was inaugurated, 2010.
Yes, 2010.
April the 3rd. And who was there at the inauguration? Almost 30 leaders of the African continent. Who was there at the inauguration? 200 or 300 leaders of Black America and the Caribbean. Who was there at the inauguration? Hundreds of our people from Brazil and other places. And that inauguration and that great celebration signaled Africans moving at new levels. Inside this monument, you can take an elevator and go 15 stories up through the powerful thighs of a black man, through his broad shoulders and backbone, up into his mind. This elevator lets you out, and you can look out through the black man's mind at the world.
Wow.
You can see his partner, the wife on one side. You can see that child pointing to the future. You can see the Atlantic Ocean. And that child is pointing not to Europe, where we always looked because we thought Europe was our salvation. It's not pointing east to the new men on the block, the Chinese and the Indian. It's not even pointing east to Mecca. It's not pointing south to the rest of Africa. That child is pointing to the Western Hemisphere. It is the unity of the African in Canada, in America, in Central America, in the islands of the Caribbean, and South America, linked up with the mother, father Africa. That is the new world of Africans. Nothing like this has ever happened. Nothing like this has ever been conceived by black people. This is what is happening today as we speak. We need to be a part of this. The European world opposes it. The Arab world opposes it. The Chinese world, the Indian world oppose it. However, Africans have to run to it, have to make it real wherever they are, have to make it real in their families, in their communities, in their churches, in their institutions, have to make it real in their communities, have to make it real in their nations, have to make it real in their regions, and have to link up those regions, the 6 regions linked to the 5 regions of the African continent. Nobody could have planned this. It has happened. Life is change, transformation, and rebirth. So WADU, PADU, all of our organizations are part of this process. No one takes preeminence over it. No individual takes preeminence over it. It is a happening. It is in the divine plan.
All right, then. Well, on that note, we're talking about the coming together of African organizations, and I believe from the history that I was able to glean, we were charged by the African Union to come together here in the diaspora as one organization, and that has been attempted to be carried out. However, it fell through. From what I can glean, there were several meetings, and one of the latest meetings took place in Florida, where some papers were to be signed. Can you elaborate on that and tell us where that is now? And if there is
just to get in a little context. In 2003, we met at the foot of the monument, and these things that I talked about took place. And one of the most important things was inside the monument, around the monument, African leaders signed an agreement, a covenant, that by the year 2017, they would put in place the process of a United States of Africa. And that is the major piece that we're talking about, that a majority of the African leaders have agreed to form a United States of Africa and to link that United States of Africa with the Africans outside of Africa, in the diaspora and in the Asia and in the Americas. Now, what that means is that African peoples have to organize for this connectedness. And so there's been a request from the African Union for the peoples in the diaspora, meaning Europe, meaning Asia, meaning South America, Central America, North America, to come up with a formula of unification, and they try to put a process in place. But it's not one organization. It's one collective process. It's not one leader. It's one collective family of leaders. And so people have misunderstood. It's not signing memorandums of understanding when we haven't put a substance, organic process in place to link the unity. A piece of paper will not give you unity if you haven't linked up those organizations that are key and crucial over this last 50 years, these last 30 and 20 years, working in the field of trying to find unity. If you haven't hooked up an educational process that is not trying to be European and white, but trying to be African. So I think some people, including myself and others, have not read this thing right.
Mm-hmm.
They want us to organize, but they don't know who we are. We have to decide how we organize. We are the most organized African people on the planet. I'm talking about African peoples in Canada, in the U.S., in South America, and in the Caribbean. I just came from Trinidad and Tobago last week. We are organized in the Caribbean. I was asked to be a part of the Kwame Nkrumah lecture series. I helped initiate it a few years ago, and this was the anniversary of the Emancipation Support Committee. I helped initiate that 20 years ago, and the Emancipation Support Committee is helping to organize the Caribbean. We had this meeting, this celebration of African peoples, at the Central Bank Auditorium in Port of Spain, the capital of Trinidad and Tobago.
Wow.
And there were leaders there. So I'm saying here we are celebrating a leadership already organized to bond with African peoples, already bringing in the Tony Martins, who's of the land, Trinidad and Tobago, but he found his power here in America. So he went back to Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the great artists, Leroy Clark, who did his thing with my wife and others in Brooklyn with other great artists. Leroy Clark is now back in Trinidad and Tobago. He's now a Baba. He's not Leroy Clark, he's Baba. And so he has gotten into the African culture. And so some of the great leaders of Trinidad, Tobago, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, he left Trinidad and Tobago as Stokely Carmichael. He came to America. Mm-hmm. He fought in the struggles of the 60s, and then eventually he transformed himself into Kwame Ture. So we are honoring him in Trinidad and Tobago. They didn't ask the son of the soil to come down. They said, Len Jeffries, can you drop everything since you helped initiate this thing, since you knew Kwame Ture, since you knew him in America, you knew him in New York, a member of your staff gave up her apartment so that the last few years of his life, when he was fighting cancer, he had a place in New York to stay. You knew him in Guinea. You met him with the kids from Dick Gregory and the team that you took to Africa. You met him in Guinea with President Sekou Touré, and you met his wife, Miriam Makeba, up in the mountains of Guinea. So it is right for you to speak for Kwame Ture. And in fact, the people in Trinidad and Tobago are laughing because they said if you were a little taller, you could be his twin. You look like Kwame Ture.
You do.
I'm saying there is a linkage. There is a linkage that has been going on for years, so we can't ask the AU to give us direction on how to develop this linkage. So we tried. They had formulas on how we should organize. That formula is not going to work for us. The African Senate Group, the UNIA, and the ASCAC, and all these organizations, the Black Association of Social Workers, the Black Association of Psychologists, the Black Association of Lawyers, we already have our formulation. And so we can't fit into the AU formula. AU didn't understand that. That whole process has to be revised. I can't organize the Black psychologists. Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Richard King, Dr. Francis Tress-Welding already done that. I can't organize the Black social workers. My big brother, I'm little Lenny, he's big Lenny. Len Dunstan was the president of the Black social workers. They are already organized. We can't organize these Black ministers. The Black fraternity groups are already organized. The Black Masonic groups are already organized. The Black youth groups are already organized. We have to come up with our formula on how you organize Black America, the Caribbean, and Brazil. Brazil is already organized. You go to Bahia in Brazil, the blackest part of Brazil, and you go into the old city, and you got Olodum dancing through the streets of Brazil. And you go into another section of Salvador, the capital of Brazil, and you got Iraie organizing the youth and the young people. So the formula that they came up with was done without knowledge of the African in the Americas.
Wow. So basically, are you saying, Dr. J, that
we're fighting over nothing?
Right. And
we're fighting over lack of understanding.
Okay.
We're fighting over ego. I don't need to be on a seat in ECOSOC.
Okay.
I've already created my seat of moving around the African world with power, like the whirlwind of Marcus Garvey, and like he talked about. I don't need to have a seat in a council. The work that I've done is already going to be in any process that they put together. The work that Dr. Ben has done to give us the now. The work that Dr. Clark has done to give us an African mind. The work that Dr. Jacob Ruz, Dr. Asa Hilliard, all of us, our family, the generations and students under us are carrying out what we did. But there's a misunderstanding of all this. That's why in December 2010, after we had the April inauguration of the statue and the celebration of the independence of Senegal and a lot of the states that had a 50-year independence celebration, we had a world festival. in Dakar, Senegal, in which the intellectuals came, the artists came, the leaders came. That was one of the greatest moments in the history of the African world. And so these other things that are happening 2 or 3 years later are building on that. But if our people don't even know that African scholars got together for a 2-week world forum, thousands of them. And I was asked to organize 50 or 60 of them from America and the Caribbean.
Okay.
And we were there. Wade Nobles and his wife, Dr. Rosin Jeffries, my wife, Dr. Ruth Love, Dr. Renoka Rossini, Anthony Browder. We were there. And at this World Festival, Brazil brought in 450 people. Martinique brought in 50. Jamaica. They opened up this ceremony with the most exciting ceremony. When I saw the Chinese do the Olympics, I said, oh, my God, this is a once-in-a-lifetime. This is a statement by the Chinese that we have arrived. We're prepared to handle your Olympics game, and we're prepared to do it in a way that you have never seen before. When I saw that Chinese man walking through the air around that stadium, I said, oh, my God, that's China's statement to the world. But in December 2010, a couple of years ago, we did the same thing. The opening of the World Festival was the most extraordinary thing in the stadium in Senegal, with 50,000 people sitting in there. And then they had in front of us this white thing over the stadium. And I said, well, why did they knock out those 10,000 seats? I said, that we could put some more people in here because there were people outside. But no, I had paralysis of analysis. That whiteness in front of me in that stadium was a sheet, a covering going from the top of the stadium down to the track. And that was the screen. And when the lights went out, that screen came on. And there was the history of Africa before us, the building of the pyramids, the temples and the churches in Ethiopia and Mali and whatnot, Benin. And they had a history on the screen, and it was rolling before us. And then the lights went out again. And then they had a ship, a slave ship, sailing across the screen. That was taking Africans out of Africa. Then the lights went out again. Then you saw people running around on the stadium. You couldn't really make it out, but when the lights came on, thousands of people were standing on a map of Africa around the whole continent field, whole stadium field, a map of the continent. I said, oh, my goodness, how could anybody conceive of this? This was done in 5 months with Africans from Senegal, from Jamaica, from Brazil, put this thing together, and Nigeria, put this together. And then while we had the cultural celebration, we were meeting in serious intellectual dialogue, the likes of which have never taken place in the Great Hall.
Oh, right.
So what had happened last 2 weeks ago in South Africa was a continuation. First, the intellectuals met. David Horn and others were there in this intellectual process, and they had their battles, etc. And there will be battles, but it has to be battles within the family. Then after the intellectuals met, the civil society met. That's what ECOSOC is about, the Economic and Cultural Council. The civil society met to decide their programs and their plans. Then the parliament met. 1,000 people from all over met. Then the foreign ministers met to take the decrees and the resolutions from this process. And then the heads of state met to approve it and then to come up with a declaration. There is a process in place that has been going on for many years, and now it's being perfected.
All right. That sounds wonderful. This is some great news that we will share and spread with the rest of the African world throughout the Internet. Dr. J, while we have you on the line, we just want to talk about future. How does the future look? I mean, how do things
looks rough? There's storm clouds on the scene.
Okay.
African peoples who don't have their mind, and they have the European mind, and some of them have the Arab mind, and some of them have the Asian mind. African peoples are ready to give the continent up another time. It was given up in the ancient times to the Hyksos who invaded in 1500 BC. It was given up in 700 BC when the Assyrians invaded. It was given up in 500 BC when the Persians invaded, 300 BC when the Greeks invaded, 30 BC when the Romans invaded. And then Africa tried to find its way again. But then you had the Dark Ages. But while you had the Dark Ages, you had Africans flowering. And so you had a flowering of Africa when they created a new synthesis. But then 1500 BC, here comes Christopher Columbus. 1500 AD, here comes Christopher Columbus. And a new devastation of Africa was put in place. So these last 500 years, we've had this devastation. Racism, dehumanization. They attempted to push the African out of the human family. Slavery, colonialism, and now neocolonialism. But Africa is rising. But we have to be aware that the mind of Europe is in us. We have to purge ourselves of the European mind. We have to be in a religious tradition. But Christianity comes out of Africa, the worship of the deity, the understanding of a son of God, the understanding of a holy mother, the understanding of the commandments. All that is in the deep African tradition. It has been whiteized and taken from us. And so these minds of confusion that are in us have to be clarified, and that's the process that's going on. But we're going to see Africans doing the wrong thing because they got the European mind. They're seduced.
Yeah.
They've been given money to do the wrong thing. So we have to be vigilant. We have to form a leadership corps and a leadership process that constantly is on guard against Africans. What we used to call, if you're a drug addict, you say you're sliding back, you're backsliding, or if you got a religious tradition and you go falling back into criminality, etc. We got to watch Africans who haven't been trained or taught to look at the African world and its values, who have been taught and trained to see a Jesus, a blind-eyed, blue-eyed Jesus, who have been taught to step into Islam but see an Arab Islam, who have stepped into the traditions of the East, and then they have made it kung fu and karate, and that's not what their culture is. Their culture is a divine thing that they use the martial arts for, and that whole martial arts tradition comes out of the Nile Valley. So we flipped history upside down. That's why they demonized me, because they knew I was on the cutting edge of this, had been trained by Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben, having partners like Asa Hilliard and Jacob Carruthers and all these sisters that are so powerful. But it's not me. You could kill the messenger, but the message is there. And we've got to tap into it and formulate the new African institutions. And that's what WADU, PADU, SRDC, all of that is. But we have to let the African Union know that just as you need us to help you formulate what's happening in Africa and the world, because we're world people, you can't tell us what to do in our world.
Yes.
We have to figure out, how do you politely say that our world is so well organized that even in semi-slavery in America today, we pull out of the American insanity $1 trillion. That's our disposable income, because we are everywhere in America. And we're not there because we're sitting on our butts. Many Africans think we're lazy. Many Africans think black men are all in prison. Many Africans think black women are selling their bodies. They don't know that we are the most successful Africans since the time of the pharaohs.
Can you
in
say that
spite
again?
Of carrying all of this slavery in us and around us and worshiping a white, blonde, blue-eyed Jesus and thinking that Arab Islam is Islam. In spite of all of that, we have extracted out of this system of domination and destruction that $1 trillion. Not one time, but that is $1 trillion every year and growing. If we took 1% of that $1 trillion, it's $10 billion. If we took 10% of it, it is $100 billion. If we took 10% of our disposable wealth in black America, we could have $100 billion aid plan to Africa, which is bigger than anything the Europeans ever thought of, anything the Africans, the Asians are doing now. We could provide, if we controlled our wealth and we managed our wealth, $100 billion African plan, $100 billion a year stretched over 10 years, that would be $1 trillion 10-year plan for Africa. That is the potential that could come out of Black America with 10% of our wealth. You still have 90% of your wealth to do with it what you will. But we can't even do with it what we will because our minds are so programmed to be the worst consumers of garbage in the history of the world that we spend $300 for Snickers. We spend $1,000 for some gold hanging around our neck. We got gold wigs that cost $1,000. If we stopped consuming garbage and got into ourselves, we could give ourselves a $100 billion development plan, waiting for something to come out of the White House or come out of corporate America. So we have to change the whole mindset, and that's where it's going.
All right.
That's what we're discussing.
Well, I consider you as my president in terms of a president for our people. I would say that Dr. Leonard Jeffries is my president. He represents me. He talks for me. He speaks for me and does a very, very good job of it.
And I'm doing it because, and I feel that presidency, when young people who are in the African tradition see me. A brother saw me the other day. I was being taped outside of the grammar school where I graduated. He stopped. He didn't even greet me, but then he just stayed in respect for about 5 minutes. And then before he walked past me, he touched the ground. I said, my goodness, he could just feel my presence. So I'm not doing it for me. It's not a me, it's a we.
Right.
I'm standing. When you look around me, you see Marcus Garvey. You look in back of me, you see W.E.B. Du Bois. You look alongside of me, you see Harriet Tubman. You see Booker T. You see Nat Turner. You see a whole host of others, Jacob Carruthers, Asa Hilliard. You see their children. You see their partners. Jacob Carruthers had 2 beautiful wives, Ivor Carruthers and then Ife Carruthers. And you see them. You can't see me without seeing my brother, without seeing my wife, without seeing my brother's kids. Dr. Hassan Jeffries, who was at Ohio State, who wrote the book Bloody Lounge, our brother Julian Bond, when we were together at the Senegal celebration, he said, Dr. Jeffries, your nephew wrote Bloody Lounge. He said it was the struggle that we were involved in and Kwame Ture was involved in. He has analyzed that better than anybody other. That's my young nephew. And so it's not just me, it's generations of us. It's not just me, it's the ancestors that are with us. It's not just me, it's all these partners, males and females. We have to organize that. I'm not going to get into a fight with David Horn over organizing some diddly shit.
Yeah.
We got to organize the real deal. That's our families. That's our institutions. And then we have to tell the AU, we got Black America organized. Now let's come up with a plan. And one of the plans, I'll be in Philadelphia this weekend, trying to pay homage to and Cobra, our reparations organization, and Queen Mother Dorothy, Lewis Benton, that passed. And she hooked into Wadu and was our link to Cobra, among the many links. But we have to raise reparations. Africans on the continent, even the most progressive, are afraid to raise reparations. Even the most sincere are afraid to raise reparations. Reparations has to come from us, just like the claiming of the Nile came from us. Dr. Diop had said that the reclaiming of the Nile Valley, the awakening of African consciousness is going to come from the west and then it's going to spread back east. And that's what is happening. Reparations has to be raised because the world owes us. We don't owe the world a dime. The Arab world owes us. The European world owes us. The world owes us, and what has to happen is we have to put the reparations program on the agenda. They may not give us a penny. People say, Dr. J, you're crazy. Everybody won't give us a penny. They don't have to give us a penny. But we can't go into a meaningful future if we do not take debt slavery off of the table. They have us so tied up wherever we are in debt, including Black America, including the Caribbean. They have us so tied up in debt that Africans on the continent can't pay the interest on the debt. If you can't pay the interest on the debt, the principal is there forever, growing. So we raise reparations to say, you owe us so much money that you can never pay it. And they say, you ain't going to get a dime. We say, okay, we may not get a dime, but you got to take this debt off of our back.
Absolutely.
All these contracts that these leaders were forced to sign to give you our mineral wealth, even the latest one signed by the Chinese, you got to redo all of that. Africa can't give its future away. No leader of Africa today can give the gold, the diamonds, the titanium, and all that is in the African soil, give it away to the Chinese for the next 100 years, to the Europeans for the next 100 years. That is inhuman. That is ungodly. That's the devil's plan. So, but who's going to have the strength to raise that? Only us. We've got to raise it. So I got work to do. You got work to do. We can't involve in no dirty shit on who's going to represent what. And let David Horn go in ECHOSAC, and he'll represent me.
All right.
But because of the thoughts and ideas I have and the work that I've been doing, I'll be represented by all of those, like a leader from Senegal. When I was leaving the World Parliament, and it's a building, it's a complex of buildings. The World Parliament in South Africa can seat 1,000 people as delegates and another 1,000 as observers, and they have 6 booths to translate instantaneously in the languages around the world, including Swahili. And when I was leaving that UN-type assembly, walking a few hundred feet in front of me to the administrative complex, where they have 10 commission officers, and each of those commission officers can seat 70 to 100 people with the same translation capability, with a big, enormous conference table. I've never seen a conference table that large around it. And those 10 commissions can hold over 1,000 people, the parliamentarians, meeting at the same time, each discussing a different issue. In that same building complex, each nation of the 55 nations, each nation has small offices. Each one has 3 to 5 offices. And some of the bigger nations have maybe 7 or 8 offices. So you're talking about hundreds of offices already located in this complex. And as I was walking between the two, the Great Assembly building, with all this African art and imagery there, and then into the officer, some black man, like a Kwame Ture, Kwame was a few inches taller than me, heavy melon eyes, wearing a kufi, came up and gave me a hug and said, Dr. Jeffries, how you doing? I said, brother, how you doing? Now, I met so many people, I didn't know who the brother was, but I had to act like I knew him, and I was giving him the proper greetings. And then he says, Dr. J, you've changed my life. I said, what do you mean, brother? He says, in 1982, I heard you speak at a trial of slavery in Brooklyn, New York. And he said, I have not been the same since. I've been following you. I've been doing you. You represent me and the best that I can pull out of me. I was blown away. So he said, not only were we together in Brooklyn in 1982, I went with you to help set up the Institute of the Black World in Ouagadougou, and in what they call Upper Volta at that time, but it's Burkina Faso now. And we went with David Robeson, the grandson of Paul Robeson, and Dr. Sheila Walker. And I said, oh, good, brother, I remember that. Now, he said that at that tribunal in 82, he didn't know the story. They were putting slavery on trial. And they had asked Dr. Clark, our great leader, to join them and speak on it. He said, no, get Dr. Ben. They asked Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben didn't want to be involved because a number of the people that was putting this together were so-called progressives and communists. So Dr. Ben said, go get Jeffries. And so they came to me. And so I said, well, what are you doing? We're putting slavery on trial, but we need a history of slavery.
Right.
And we'd like you to give us a half an hour or 40-minute presentation. I said, well, that's my forte. Nobody's been more involved in the slave dungeons than I.
All right.
I'll do it. I was involved with Alex Haley for 7 years, helped him do Roots. I'll do it. Well, I'll be damned if, because they had these progressive, radical, and sometimes communist leaders coming in, they couldn't get visas from Europe, and they couldn't get visas from the Caribbean. So the leaders 2 days before, they said, Dr. J, we're in trouble. I said, what's happening? They said, we can't get our people in the country to present. Do you think you could present a 2-hour presentation on slavery? And I said, I think so. And so I did one of the most significant speeches I ever made in life. That's what changed that brother. Now listen to this. That brother is from Senegal. His name is Samba Ambou. He's from Senegal. At one point, he was the ambassador of Senegal to South Africa. He's now working at the South African university system. And what he has done is he's taken the learnings that I put out, and Dr. Clark and Dr. Glenn Ace, the Wade Nobles, and he synthesized that into the most powerful message. He spoke at the meeting of the Parliament. Marcus Garvey's son, Dr. Julius, spoke first, and he gave a history of black struggle in the West and the link to inspire Africa in its liberation movements. And then in the afternoon, this brother, Dr. Samba, spoke. And his message was so powerful, I'm sitting there, holy shit, look at me up there. I'm worried about whether I could get a chance to give a few messages. Here is me in the form of an African from the continent who's already involved in this process. They all respect him. Any message that I have from America that I need to get into the leadership of Africa, just pass it to Dr. Samba, and he'll take your message into the power that's growing in the black world. This is the most mind-blowing thing. I sat there observing this stuff. A brother from Egypt got up. There were 15 or more Arab leaders from the African countries in North Africa, and most of them were getting up speaking Arabic, so we had to go to the translation. This brother got up from Egypt, and he said, I am going to speak in English because my message is to the black American.
Ooh.
And I'm sitting back saying, oh, my God, what's happening here? And before he could almost complete his statement, on the other side of the aisle, a voice came from the Brazilians that this is not correct. This is an insult to the Brazilians. We represent 90 to 100 million black people in Brazil. And then, so you shouldn't be just targeting the black Americans. Well, the guy stood his ground. He said, I didn't mean to insult the Africans from Brazil, but I have a special message to the Africans from America because they changed my life. Ooh. He said, when I was a 17-year-old boy running around the pyramids in Egypt, there was a group of black Americans led by an old black man, and they were pointing out the history of the pyramids and the temples, and they showed me the faces, and they said, this is not Arab. This is African culture and civilization. This is a statement made 2 weeks ago in the African Parliament by an Egyptian standing up, saying up the important. He said, I have a message to you because we need you and you need us. This is from an Arab standing up. Do you understand what I'm talking about? And then when I got a chance to say a few words, and all I had to say was, we need a plan. If you don't plan, you plan to fail. And this is why you need the plan. And then I held up my master's thesis from Columbia in 1963. I said, this is the Senegal plan. And I'm calling for regionalization of Africa. But Senegal had a beautiful plan, but there was nothing to plan in Senegal. There's nothing but peanuts. This is my PhD. This is the Ivory Coast plan. And the Ivory Coast had a lot to plan for, but they needed labor. And that plan couldn't be realized. The economic miracle couldn't be sustained because they needed labor from the other countries. And then I said, Guinea is the richest of the African countries in West Africa, but it did not have a plan, so no development has taken place in Guinea. All I had to say was, we need systems analysis and we need a plan. Do you know that stopped that parliament? People wanted to come up to me. I said, no, baby, it's fine. People, and even when they cried them down, people still came up to me. One brother said, look, I need to have copies of this. And he actually took the documents, including the document on South Africa, and he tried to go and get them copied. And the people said, we don't have enough paper. We're running off so much paper, we didn't have enough paper. So I told the brother, I will leave these things available for you to do. Now, do you understand the excitement I just experienced that I couldn't have predicted any of this?
Well, we thank you for sharing this with us.
You know?
I mean, this is awesome. Benediction
de Souza, who represents the black parliaments, had a book. I took it down from my shelf. Benediction de Souza. She was a black woman running for the mayor of Rio when we met her in 1992. 1992, right. They demeaned her. Remember we were talking about the meaning of our leadership?
Yes.
She was right. The press called her a monkey and everything. So she lost the election. But that didn't, and we were there in 92 And when we heard that she lost the election, we went to fortify her. She was fortifying me because that's when I was attacked as the worst individual in the world. And speaking in Rio and Sao Paulo and whatnot, she was fortifying me. So she was saying, you can help us. We need to get the Malcolm X film down here. They banned it in Brazil. And we need to show that film of our brother. Can you imagine? That's our dialogue in 92.
Wow.
I'm fortifying her for being demeaned and losing Rio. And she's fortifying me for being a professor that everybody in the world hates.
Wow.
Well, we went back in 95. In 95, we went with her and the president of Brazil and Pelé, the greatest football player in the history of the world. And we went up into the mountains of Brazil to celebrate Zumbi of Palmares, the Republic of Palmares, the first free republic in the Americas, 1600 to 1700. We were up there in the mountains.
Mm.
Then she finally became a congressman in Brazil. She finally became the governor of Rio region. And then at the Great World Festival, 450 Brazilians came. And while I was speaking at the forum, she comes in with the Brazilians while I am talking about her.
Ooh.
And then after it was over, I went up in the break, and I wanted to, I spoke Portuguese, but I was so caught up I couldn't get out hello. And the translator said, Dr. Jeffries, she heard you. We heard you. We got your message. Well, Miss Benedicta de Souza was with me in South Africa.
Wow.
It was her delegation that raised the question about not recognizing Brazil. Do you understand these connections that are taking place? And you're the first person. Well, no, you're the second person. I spoke for 3 hours to the Nation of Islam reporter, and I said, brother, you catching the spirit that's in me that I haven't even had a chance to talk about to my own people. And I said, we should have had a tape recorder. He said, Dr. Jeffries, I'm a reporter. And no way in hell I could take in my hand your message. I have taped this. I said, oh, brother, thank you, Jesus. Allah be praised.
Yes, indeed.
No, so I'm saying there's no need for us to get into no dilly shit. I don't have time for dilly shit.
Yes,
Brother
sir.
Small, my partner, he said, Dr. J, you're going to die. You need to move and do what you want to do. My wife says, when the spirit hits you and there's something important you got to say to the world, you got to say it.
Mm.
So at the World Festival, the forum, or after the forum, the black mayors have bonded. The 600 and something black mayors have bonded with the African mayors. All that's going on. I was in Atlanta last week for that, and then I went to Trinidad and Tobago. But in April or so, we had a summit of the black mayors in Senegal, and they were signing documents linking Tuskegee and the black institutions to the Senegal University, linking black cities in America to the Senegal cities. And in fact, they said when I came into the big room that Dr. Jeffries Hall, you're going to be saying a few words. I said, no, I'm not on the program. And then I later learned that I was supposed to say a few minutes about the historical significance. Spirit hit me when I got up there to say my few words. And for the next 30 minutes, I gave an analysis of where we are and what we do. I took 30 minutes from the president of Senegal.
Wow.
When he got the mic, he said, Dr. Jeffries has forced me to rewrite my speech as we speak.
Mm.
Do you understand what's happening?
Yes, indeed.
Now, the president of Senegal wanted to put his son in place, and the people didn't want that, so he lost the election. At that meeting where I took the mic and made a 30-minute presentation about what this is all about, 6 of the cities that linked up with Black America were of the party of the president. 6 of the cities were of the parties of the opposition. Macky Sall, who won the election and is the president of Senegal, was there, and he was one of the Senegalese mayors linking with the mayors in America, and he was linked with Monroe, Louisiana.
Mm.
He is now the president of Senegal. So the transition, which would look like a disconnect because Wade lost and his vision is lost and this and that, no. Wade lost the presidency, but this brother who's in place now is a younger version of Wade, and he's linked up to us.
Wow.
So this ain't about no election of nothing. This is the Creator at work and the ancestors. We couldn't have planned this shit that I'm telling you about.
Couldn't have planned it any better. And we sure thank you, Dr. J, and we'll...
Well, no, what you did was historic, and the spirit hit me, so I need a copy of all that, and then we need to decide how we need to disseminate it larger.
We'll do.
Right.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch as well.
Okay.
And I'll do this ASAP.
Yes. All right, then.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Africa is calling. Liberation. The people are crying. Liberation. Africa is calling. Liberation. The people are crying. Every day we the black people living in the West read the news all day, brutalize my brothers in Soweto, yeah. Tears come from my eyes when I read the news, oh yeah. All my little sisters are they crying. Keep up the fight, my brothers. Keep up the fight, my sisters. Keep up the fight, my brothers. Keep up the fight, my sisters.